name's Matthias. I'm the Chief Commercialist, for PayU. I'm also the part of Naspers FinTech. PayU is a company owned by Naspers, which is one of the large global tech investors in the space. So we have a business in multiple markets and geographies, currently 17 markets, ranging from India, Africa, Central Eastern Europe, Russia, also all across Latin America, from Brazil to Colombia to Mexico, and 7 markets there. So we do a lot of cross-border business in those geographies, and for the record, spent 12 years before at a payment company called PayPal, also did some business there in international functions, and so worked in the payment space for a little while, and was there also on some bank boards and other topics, so this should be an interesting one to discuss. Why do we do this? We are actually, as our heritage, and this is an example where we're coming from, we are super hyper-local. The company is very much in local payment infrastructures, and if you think about all those entrepreneurs in those high-growth markets, and we're talking roughly 85% of the world's population, so this is a very, very big topic for many people on the planet. There's lots of opportunities. They're very eager, they're leapfrogging, they want to learn. There's massive investments from themselves, from people in those markets into education. And one of the areas how development happens, now economic value and personal value is generated, is by allowing some trade, right? Selling the goods, selling the services, and selling them, of course, locally. And there's all sorts of interesting technologies also presented here, this Money 2020. But imagine they could also trade internationally a little more and could facilitate that. So there's a very strong economic reason for doing that and for allowing every entrepreneur of every size to do that. And that's one reason why we do it, because we have the infrastructure locally, we enable a lot of business globally, but it's actually also not that easy. So if you are this very gentleman in one of our high growth markets, to sell your goods and services locally is maybe kind of possible already. To sell them internationally has big limits and big boundaries. So imagine a world where this is facilitated and easy. And one aspect to do this is, of course, coupled to regulation. I give you the business case behind as well, because the good thing is, if there is a business case, then it also is very sustainable and it's very attractive. It attracts investments, it attracts entrepreneurs, it attracts businesses all over the place. This is the number for 2020. It's a very specific number, so roughly $1 trillion of cross-border volume is expected by 2020. That's the number that came from a consultancy and our friends at Alibaba Inc. There's higher numbers, there's lower numbers, whatever you slice and dice it for cross-border trade, it's the largest single opportunity in commerce today. Nothing is bigger in terms of an opportunity for cross-border, so there is a big business case. And again, you should link it to the growth markets. At the moment, the forecast for this number is close to 2/3, close to 65% is coming from the growth markets. You compare it to another figure, spending in Asia-Pacific, spending in the Asian markets is expected to be 2/3 of all spending consumers do in the 2020s. So there's a massive economic opportunity. It is a big business case. It makes total sense to think about cross-border and cross-border payments for all of us in the room. Now, why is it so complicated, Matthias? What are you talking about? We've just heard interesting insights from the previous speakers on blockchain, before that on settlement topics. We had other sessions here at Money 2020, and even from a PayU point of view, we have nice presentations, and we presented here. We have one single API that allows all our 400 payment methods to be accessed with a couple of lines of code. So what's the problem, Matthias? It's actually very easy. And think about blockchains, think about what we can do with them, think about how we can take down borders and we can settle within split seconds cross-border, right? We can. Mobile payments are very easy. So the gentleman I showed on the bike, he doesn't need to balance his laptop on the bike. It's actually probably an Android phone, making sure he has the service and goods offered to someone who has a slightly higher net income iPhone in an established market and sells his goods and services. So the point here is, and on top of it, let me give you another example, we're extending credit to him as working capital, right? There were many companies, you think about the Billies and the SME lending track yesterday, right? Think about extending credit to consumers all over the place. We just launched in India with a new consumer product with Monedo. There's many other examples. So technically, this is all doable. There's no limits, right? There's cloud services, there's blockchain, there's all those technologies out there. And so why do we have problems? Why do we have challenges? Also logistics is covered. To ship, technically, go to UPS, go to DHL, go to any major international carrier, it's actually not that difficult. Maybe the exception is Brazil in some areas, just joking. But there is actually a lot of enablement there. And from our point of view, we argue technically, a lot of the things we're dreaming about can be done, could be done, maybe should be done. The should be done is a different discussion, that's why maybe regulation is coming in there as well. Let's take a look at the regulatory part of it, right? And let's look at it. So, some of us in the room would argue this regulation thing is just cumbersome. Right? It's difficult, it slows down business, you need to read a lot of things, you need to understand a lot of things, you need to get a legal advice, you need to deal with it. It's difficult, right? It's cumbersome, and it changes all the time, and you don't know what to do. The other part of it is, oh cool, it enables a lot of things, right? The bird on top can fly freely, and actually there's new frameworks. There's new stuff you can do. There's security for investors, there's security for businesses to do it, there's safety for consumers, there's transparency for businesses, right? Let me give you examples here. GDPR in Europe, we're in Amsterdam. So maybe GDPR is on the lower part of it because it prohibits a lot of things. It doesn't allow certain things, of course. It also means that some businesses outside of Europe block European customers from accessing it. It created a wall. Let's not forget about that. So there is an aspect of GDPR in this regulation which is actually not very positive. It limits. At the same time, it was probably the right thing to do because it also protects consumers and it gives the consumer the confidence to actually know that when they're dealing with certain services, that their data is safe and it's their data, right? And it also gives businesses a safe framework because they know what they can do and they know what they can't do, and it gives them a level playing field, right? So GDPR regulation is one example that could be a good example for, yes, it creates limits, it also enables a lot of business. Take PSD2, take open banking, staying again here in Europe, and I can talk also about there's Indian regulation, right, on demonetization, on the new frameworks around the India stack, on, take Brazil, marketplaces, right? Let's take the Brazilian marketplace example. Yes, pretty much a year ago they said you need to be compliant with the new marketplace regulation by September. 2 to 3 months. Very tough time. They said this is going to happen now 1 year later. So it's cumbersome, you need to fulfill it, you suddenly need to be compliant with the law. At the same time, now you have a law, you can work with it, this is the marketplace regulation that enables the business. Going back to PSD2 and open banking, it's massively complex to comply with it. It's cumbersome to open up your systems and building the APIs and making sure consumers have the access. Some people would argue, is it a full level playing field? Because I have to open up as a financial services institution. Do I get the same access from the other players in there? So where does it create a limit? Where does it create an unlimited field? At the same time, a lot of the companies here in the room are very happy about that because it gives access to data that allows to score much faster and gives more transparency and allows a lot of international business being built in Europe. Right? So regulation is playing on both sides of the fence, and I find it a very interesting discussion. I'm happy to follow up on that and discuss with everyone in the room and beyond which part of the fence we are at. Another interesting question we should address, actually a few interesting questions here. So Matthias, you talk about regulation. There is no such thing as regulation. What kind of regulation are you talking about? Right? And by the way, regulation can be very complex, many aspects. So Matthias, you talked about data protection, fair enough. Data is one area. Consumer data, merchant data, fair enough. What about financial services regulation? Another big area, right? The right capital requirements, the right licensing requirements, all those wonderful topics in the financial services area. What about tax? Have you ever dealt with, for example, the situations in Argentina and many other markets in Latin America about withholding tax? Local entity, international business, certain withholding taxes for some goods. Can be an hour presentation just on withholding tax overview in Latin America. Can spend another hour and a half on that one probably, and there's only Latin America and one specific area of taxation. What about the free shipment and movement of goods and services and taxes and customs around it, right? What about money flows? It's very easy to get money into Brazil, it's very easy to get money into India. Try to repatriate it. Good luck. Right, and try to get it out of it and make sure that if you're an Indian merchant, you can export, well, sort of, kind of, certain industries here and there, occasionally, depending on, right? And we are setting up companies in our ecosystem here as part of Naspers and part of PayU to help and facilitate some of that. But the fact that we need separate entities, separate companies, for example, to get money flows in and out of India shows you the complexity and requirement there. And again, It is a multifaceted tool. I'm talking about all of this regulation, and one of the discussion points I'd like to have is maybe what is the important part, which part of regulation could be focused on or maybe collaborate on. And then the other question is, as we're talking about international cross-border regulation, should it actually happen? Do we actually need it? Should it be a global standard at all? Is Matthias asking the right question here? Right? So, global or local? Let's imagine a world where there's a lot of global regulation. Let's say we accomplish it for certain areas of financial regulation, for certain areas of data, and for certain areas of taxation. Good example I would like to bring here, think about pure banking. Think about, there's a lot of local regulation, right? There's a lot of things that work there, and at the same time there's standards like Basel II. So let's think this is a good framework where there's some global and some local. So we are thinking, hey, in the world where there's a lot of global regulation, that's nice. That helps us on standards and complexity. We know what we're doing. We don't need to differentiate by individual markets. It's a safe investor bet, right? It's also a safe business bet. I don't need to customize my systems here and there. Very nice. And here and there can be 18 markets, can be 55 markets, can be 120 markets, right? You know all of those topics. The local part of it is regulation plays a very strong play locally because it's very important locally. People's habits are differently. The appetite for protection of a European customer, of a Dutch customer, of a German customer is very different in certain areas from an Indian customer, from a Brazilian customer, and from a Mexican customer. Right? So it must be very local specific. Shopping habits are different, payment habits are different, state of the industry, state of the banking sector is very different. So there is a strong case for actually very specific local regulation. You can't just say one size fits all and do it all globally. Right? So this is a balance, and maybe again something like Basel II is a good example. There's a certain set of rules which apply internationally, and there's a certain set of rules which apply locally. And that's where we are thinking about, hey, let's talk about, and this is almost the end, so you're almost through this regulatory discussion here. So yeah, there should be a global framework. There should be a discussion on certain topics where we say maybe we should have a common standard even. Maybe it's not a regulatory law because there is no global law, there's no entity that does it, but maybe we should agree on certain standards in areas like a Basel II that makes sense for all of us to facilitate a lot of business, have a level playing field, enable a lot of commerce, a lot of transactions. Where we are coming from is more of the middle part. We work a lot with local regulators and we work a lot on local standards, so we comply with all local standards as we are super hyper-local in those markets and follow the local developments there very much. That could be an area where we also collaborate because we have contribution to make locally. We are seeking partners to work with us internationally, and that's where we are on the number 3 side, and that's the end, basically, where we're thinking, hey, as an industry, we're here in this room, we have a conference, maybe we have a beer in the evening, we talk, but do we really take care of the regulation? Are we now not in a stage where fintech and payments and our industries are mature enough to collaborate on those topics and make sure we have some form of global standards and collaborate on that? So our invitation from PayU, from Naspers FinTech, is to work on those topics, maybe have a discussion here, maybe have a discussion afterwards at our booth, or ultimately send me an email. Reach out to me, would like to have this discussion with you and see whether we can do something on international regulatory standards, but also facilitate more business in a global, local way. Thank you very much.